You are being played. Here's something nobody tells you in school, in therapy, or at your family dinner table. Every time you react, every time you snap back, storm out, fire off that text you shouldn't have sent, or defend yourself to someone who was never really listening, you hand over the most valuable thing you own, your power. Not money, not reputation, not opportunity, though all of those eventually follow. The thing you surrender in those heated, unguarded moments is control over yourself. And once someone knows they can trigger you, they own you. They will use that knowledge, consciously or not, forever. This book is not a self-help manual. It's not a guide to mindfulness, journaling, or breathing exercises, though those things have their place. This is a field manual for a different kind of war, the one happening inside you every single day in boardrooms, bedrooms, traffic jams, and text threads across America. The war between who you are and who you react to. Most people never win this war. Most people don't even know they're fighting it. Let me tell you about a man named Daniel Reeves. Daniel was a mid-level project manager at a logistics firm in Atlanta. Sharp guy. Good instincts, the kind of person his colleagues respected, but his bosses quietly feared. Not because he was threatening, but because he was right too often and didn't know how to let people land softly when he proved it. In 2019, Daniel was passed over for a promotion. The position went to Marcus Webb, a guy Daniel had trained, a guy who, by any objective measure, was less qualified. Daniel knew this. His whole team knew this. And when his director pulled him aside to deliver the news, Daniel did what most of us do. He reacted. Not violently, not dramatically, just visibly. His jaw tightened. His eyes went flat. He gave a clipped professional response that communicated everything he was feeling without saying a single unfiltered word. This is wrong. I know it. You know it. And I'm not okay. That moment lasted maybe 4 seconds. It cost Daniel his next 3 years. His director, a man named Gerald Huang, who had the political instincts of a career diplomat, filed that moment away. Daniel, in Huang's mental ledger, became a reaction risk. Too emotional for the room, too close to the surface. You couldn't predict what he'd do when things got hard, and in a company where perception was everything, unpredictability was the cardinal sin. Daniel didn't get another shot at leadership for 2.5 years, not because he wasn't talented, not because the promotion wasn't unfair, but because in 4 seconds he showed his hand, and someone picked it up and used it. Here's the brutal reality of the world we actually live in. Your emotions are not your allies. They feel like truth. They feel like justice. They feel like authenticity. But in the arena of real-world power, in offices, negotiations, relationships, and public perception, your unmanaged emotions are the most reliable weapon your opponents have access to, and you hand it to them. Every time. Biological science explains why. Your brain was engineered for a world that no longer exists, a world where the threat standing in front of you was physical, immediate, and lethal. The part of your brain that manages threat responses, the amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure buried deep in your neural architecture, doesn't distinguish between a lion on the savannah and a passive-aggressive Slack message from your coworker. To your amygdala, both are emergencies. Both trigger the same cascade. Adrenaline floods your bloodstream, cortisol spikes, rational thinking goes dark, and your body prepares for one of 3 responses: fight, flee, or freeze. In 10,000 BC, this saved your life. In a conference room in Chicago in 2025, it ends your career. Every single day, in ways large and microscopic, you are making decisions filtered through this broken, software. You fire back at a criticism before you've had time to evaluate whether it's valid. You avoid the conversation you need to have because anxiety has dressed discomfort up as danger. You let anger shape your words with someone you love and spend weeks rebuilding what 6 seconds destroyed. You are being played, not by other people, though sometimes that too, by your own nervous system. The top performers in every field, the negotiators, the executives, the elite athletes, the quiet ones at the end of the table who somehow always end up making the final call, have discovered something that doesn't get taught in MBA programs or self-improvement podcasts. They've mastered the gap between stimulus and response, the space, sometimes a fraction of a second, sometimes long enough to breathe, where a choice actually lives. Most people never find that gap. They live in a world where stimulus and response are fused, where being triggered and reacting are the same event. But the most dangerous people in any room, dangerous in the best possible sense, have learned to stretch that gap until it becomes a canyon. In that canyon, they make decisions. Real decisions. Decisions based on strategy, on values, on long-term thinking, not on the immediate chemical storm in their bloodstream. This is not emotional suppression. It is not the cold, robotic absence of feeling. It is something far more powerful, emotional sovereignty. The ability to feel everything, the anger, the hurt, the fear, the frustration, and still choose what to do next. And here's the piece that changes everything. When you master this, when you become the person who doesn't flinch, doesn't leak, doesn't hand other people a map to your pressure points, you become ungovernable. Think about the people in your life who carry real influence. Not the loudest ones, not the ones who dominate every conversation or perform their confidence for the room. Think about the ones whose opinion actually shifts things. The ones who, when they speak, people lean in slightly. The ones who manage to be the calmest presence in a tense room. Not because they don't care, but because they care enough to stay in control. Those people share one quality above everything else. They don't react. They respond. The distinction sounds simple. It is not simple. It takes most people years, and a significant amount of pain, to understand it in their bones rather than just their heads. Reacting is automatic. It's your amygdala running the show. It's the 6-second version of you, the version built for emergencies, not strategy. Responding is chosen. It's your prefrontal cortex, your rational mind, your long-term self, having a say in what comes out of your mouth and body before it leaves. Reacting makes you predictable, and predictable people are manageable people. Responding makes you dangerous in the quiet, sovereign, utterly authentic sense of that word. By the time you finish this book, you will understand things about yourself and about power that most people will spend their entire lives missing. You will understand why your emotional reactions are costing you more than you can currently calculate. In relationships, in opportunity, in money, in years. You will understand the neuroscience behind why your brain works against you, and, more importantly, how to rewire it. You will have a complete operating system for emotional mastery, tools that work in real time, under real pressure, in real situations. Not theory, not inspiration, actual methods used by the people who operate at the highest levels of business, combat, medicine, and human performance. And you will understand the strategic dimension of all of this. Why the person who cannot be triggered, categorized, or predicted isn't just more peaceful. They're more powerful. This is the React to No One framework. And it starts with understanding what emotional reactivity is actually costing you. The price tag. You can't see. Most people have no idea what their emotional reactions cost them, not in some vague philosophical sense, in real, measurable, concrete terms, in dollars, relationships, promotions, and years of their life. They think reactivity is human. They've been told that authentic means expressing what you feel, that passion looks like intensity, that honesty means saying the thing that comes up first. They are mistaken, and that mistake is quietly structuring their entire life. Let's be specific. Dr. Simone Okafor is a physician in her early 40s practicing in Houston. By every external measure, she has built a remarkable career. But there's a partner at her practice, a man whose clinical judgment she finds genuinely dangerous, who has been making her life difficult for 3 years. Every time they interact, she manages to communicate, through posture, through tone, through the careful way she routes around him, that she finds him incompetent. She's right. He is incompetent. The problem is he's also related to the practice's largest donor. And Simone's emotional transparency, her inability to mask what she feels in his presence, has positioned her, in the eyes of the board, as difficult, combative. A poor team player. Her competence is not in question. Her emotional management is. And in the room where decisions get made, that distinction is everything. This is not a story about being fake. It's a story about leverage. Simone's real feelings are real, and they're understandable. But every time she lets those feelings show, in a micro-expression, a clipped response, a pointed silence, she hands her opponent information. She shows him where to press. She confirms that he can affect her. And people who can affect you will. The financial cost of emotional reactivity is something almost no one calculates, because it shows up in the things that don't happen, the deals not closed, the opportunities not offered, the partnerships that quietly dissolve. Research on executive derailment, the phenomenon of high-potential leaders who flame out before reaching their ceiling, consistently identifies emotional dysregulation as the leading factor. Not incompetence, not lack of vision, not bad luck. The inability to manage how they show up when the pressure is real. One reactive negotiation can collapse a deal that took months to build. One emotional performance review, where the manager loses their composure while delivering feedback, can cost a company its best employee. One heated email, sent at midnight when judgment was impaired by exhaustion and cortisol, can end a professional relationship that represented 7 figures of future revenue. These aren't dramatic stories. They're Tuesday. And they compound, because every reactive moment trains your brain to be more reactive. Every time you lose control, you reinforce the neural architecture of losing control. You are literally, biologically, making yourself worse at this over time, unless you deliberately intervene. The relationship cost is even more personal. Think about the last time you said something in anger that you couldn't unsay. Think about the look on someone's face when your words hit harder than you intended. Think about the conversation you've been avoiding for weeks because you don't trust yourself to have it without escalating. Now multiply that by years. The people who love you most see the unguarded version. They see you when you're tired, when you're threatened, when the performance you maintain for the professional world slips. And what they see, the reactive you, the hair-trigger you, the version that lashes out or shuts down, shapes their experience of being in relationship with you. Children who grow up watching a parent react without restraint don't learn that emotion is authentic. They learn that emotion is dangerous. They learn to walk carefully, to predict, to manage, to hide. Partners who live with someone whose emotional weather is unpredictable don't feel seen. They feel exhausted. They develop a low-grade chronic anxiety that has nothing to do with love and everything to do with survival. Colleagues who can never predict which version of you will walk into the meeting don't find you passionate. They find you unreliable. But here's the cost that goes deepest. Every time you react instead of respond, every time the 6-second version of you takes over, you feel it, even if you don't articulate it. The slow erosion of respect for yourself. The gap between who you are in your calm moments and who you become under pressure. That gap is where self-doubt lives. That gap is the reason so many high-performing people carry a private suspicion that they're one bad day away from being exposed, not for incompetence, but for unsteadiness, for being someone who can't hold themselves together when it matters most. The good news, and there is extraordinary good news, is that this is not fixed. It is not genetic. It is not your personality. It is a pattern, and patterns can be interrupted, redesigned, and replaced, but only if you're willing to see clearly what the current pattern is costing you. The question isn't whether you have emotional reactions. Everyone does. The question is whether those reactions are running your life, or whether you are. The alarm system that won't shut off. There's a small structure buried deep in your brain, roughly the size and shape of an almond, that is running more of your life than your conscious mind ever will. It's called the amygdala, and understanding it might be the single most important thing you ever do. Your amygdala is not sophisticated. It doesn't reason, weigh options, or consider context. It does one thing: it scans for threats. Constantly. Every second of every day, it is sorting your environment into 2 categories, safe and dangerous, and preparing your body to respond accordingly. For the vast majority of human history, this was a survival miracle. When your ancestors encountered something that could kill them, a predator, a rival, a physical threat, the amygdala fired before the rational mind could form a complete thought. Adrenaline surged, muscles tensed, blood rushed away from the digestive system and toward the limbs. The body was ready to fight or flee before the conscious brain had finished processing what it was looking at. This response saved the species. It is also destroying your career, your relationships, and your ability to think clearly under pressure. Here's the problem. Nobody talks about your amygdala cannot tell the difference between a physical threat and a social one. It cannot distinguish between a predator charging at you through the grass and a notification on your phone that says we need to talk. It processes both as emergencies. It responds to both with the same neurological alarm system, the same cortisol spike, the same narrowing of attention, the same suppression of rational thought. This is called an amygdala hijack, and it is happening to you far more often than you realize. Here's what an amygdala hijack actually looks like in the real world of 2025. You're sitting in a quarterly review at a financial services firm in Dallas. Your regional director, a methodical man named Thomas Carver, questions a decision you made 3 weeks ago. Not aggressively, not unfairly. He asks a reasonable question in a reasonable tone. But something about the phrasing, or the timing, or the fact that it's happening in front of your colleagues activates the alarm. Your heart rate climbs. Your face flushes. The voice in your head starts assembling its defense before Carver has finished his sentence. By the time he's done talking, you're not listening to his question. You're preparing your rebuttal, and when you speak, there's an edge in your voice, subtle but unmistakable, that everyone in the room registers. Carver files it away. Your colleagues file it away. You spend the rest of the day replaying the exchange, not because the content mattered that much, but because your nervous system flagged it as an attack and your body responded accordingly. What actually happened? A man asked a question. What your brain experienced. A threat to survival. This is the gap between reality and perception that emotional reactivity lives in. And until you understand it at a biological level, you will keep confusing the two. The timing problem makes this even more difficult to manage than most people realize. Your amygdala processes incoming information and triggers a response in approximately 12 milliseconds. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational analysis, long-term planning, and impulse regulation, takes at least 500 milliseconds to process the same information. Do the math. Your emotional response fires 40 times faster than your rational mind. This means that by the time you consciously decide how you want to respond to something, your body has already committed to a reaction. Your heart is already racing. Your muscles are already tense. Stress hormones are already in your bloodstream. You are already physiologically in fight or flight mode. And the best your rational mind can do at that point is play catch-up. This is not a character flaw. This is not weakness. This is biology operating exactly as designed. The problem is that the design was optimized for a world that no longer exists. The modern environment makes this dramatically worse. We are living in a sensory landscape that your amygdala was never equipped to navigate. Social media platforms are architecturally engineered to trigger threat responses, outrage, anxiety, social comparison, fear of missing out, because those emotional states increase engagement. News cycles are optimized for alarm because alarm keeps eyes on screens. Workplace communication tools create an atmosphere of perpetual urgency where every notification feels like something that needs an immediate response. Your amygdala is being bombarded constantly with signals that something might be wrong. The result is a nervous system in a state of chronic low-grade activation, always slightly alert, always slightly on edge, always ready to escalate. The threshold for a full hijack drops lower and lower until minor inconveniences trigger major emotional responses. You become, without realizing it, a person who is always almost about to react. The learning problem compounds everything. Your amygdala learns from experience, but it's a terrible student, fast and inaccurate, drawing sweeping conclusions from limited data. Every time you have an emotional reaction to something, your amygdala files that situation as evidence of danger. It adds it to the list of things to watch for. So the colleague who criticized you in a meeting 3 months ago has trained your amygdala to scan for criticism from colleagues in meetings. The relationship that ended in betrayal has trained your amygdala to scan for signs of betrayal in your current relationship. The job loss that came without warning has trained your amygdala to scan for signs of instability in every professional environment you enter. Your threat detection system is constantly expanding its database, and it doesn't ask whether its conclusions are accurate. It just files the experience and adjusts the sensitivity accordingly. This is why trauma compounds. This is why people who have been hurt in certain ways become hyper-vigilant about specific categories of experience. Their amygdala isn't malfunctioning. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. It just doesn't have the wisdom to know when the lesson it learned is leading it astray. The negativity bias built into this system is profound. Your brain is significantly better at encoding threats than rewards, failures than successes, pain than pleasure. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. Forgetting a threat could kill you. Forgetting a reward was just unfortunate. But in the context of modern life, it means your default mental operating system is scanning for problems, cataloging dangers, and building an increasingly elaborate case for why the world is threatening and other people are unreliable. You are, at the hardware level, wired toward reactivity, and that wiring, left unaddressed, will shape every decision you make. The 4 stages of emotional freedom. Not all emotional control is the same. Most people think of it as a switch. You either have it or you don't. Either you're in control or you've lost control. Either you handled it or you blew it. This binary thinking is one of the primary reasons most people never develop real emotional mastery. They believe they're either succeeding or failing, with nothing in between, and the moment they slip, they conclude that they don't have what it takes. The truth is that emotional sovereignty exists on a spectrum with 4 distinct developmental stages. Understanding where you are on that spectrum and where you're going changes everything about how you approach your own growth. Stage 1. Unconscious reactivity. This is where most of the population spends most of their lives. At Stage 1, you are entirely at the mercy of your nervous system. Stimulus and response are fused. Something happens and you react. Without pause, without choice, without any awareness that there was a gap in which a different decision was possible. Someone questions your judgment and you become defensive before you've evaluated whether the criticism is valid. A plan falls apart and you spiral into anxiety before you've assessed what can actually be salvaged. You receive good news and spend money you shouldn't because the feeling of success makes restraint feel unnecessary. People at Stage 1 genuinely believe that their emotional reactions are caused by external events. They say things like, "You made me angry," or "I couldn't help how I felt." They have no awareness of the gap between trigger and response, because for them, no gap exists. The deep cost of Stage 1 isn't just the individual reactions, it's the unpredictability they create. People around someone at Stage 1 learn to manage them, to navigate around their moods, to avoid certain topics, to buffer difficult information before delivering it. The relationship becomes defined not by honesty and trust, but by the management of volatility. Stage 2, conscious reactivity. Stage 2 is when awareness arrives, but control doesn't follow. At this stage, you know you're having an emotional reaction. You can feel it coming. You understand on some level that what you're about to say or do might not be the wisest choice, and you do it anyway. The internal monologue at Stage 2 sounds like, "I know I shouldn't send this. I'm going to send it." Or, "I can feel myself escalating. I'm going to escalate anyway." Or the classic post-reaction justification, "Yes, I lost my temper. But did you see what they did?" Stage 2 is, in some ways, more painful than Stage 1. At Stage 1, you don't know enough to feel the full weight of what you're doing. At Stage 2, you know, and you do it anyway. The gap between your self-concept and your behavior becomes a source of chronic low-grade shame. You promise yourself you'll do better. You do the same thing. You promise again. This cycle is one of the most common patterns in adult emotional development, and it grinds people down over years. Stage 3, conscious response. This is where the real work begins, and where most people who commit to emotional development eventually arrive. At Stage 3, you feel the emotion, you recognize it, and you make a deliberate choice about how to respond based not on the intensity of what you're feeling, but on what you value and what you're trying to create. You feel the anger, and you choose to speak calmly. You feel the anxiety, and you choose to take action anyway. You feel the urge to defend yourself, and you choose instead to ask a question. People at Stage 3 understand a fundamental truth that eludes most people their entire lives. Emotions are information, not instructions. Feeling angry doesn't mean you have to act angry. Feeling afraid doesn't mean the situation is actually dangerous. The emotion provides data, valuable data, about your internal state and your perception of the situation. But it doesn't get to make the final call. Stage 3 requires consistent practice and real self-awareness. You have to know your triggers well enough to see them coming. You have to have developed a toolkit of alternative responses that you can access under pressure. You have to have trained your nervous system through repetition to create space between sensation and action. This doesn't happen by reading about it. It happens by doing the work. Stage 4. Emotional alchemy. This is the level most people don't believe is real until they've experienced it. At stage 4, you're not just managing your response to emotions. You're transforming the emotions themselves. Instead of containing anger, you redirect its energy into focused action. Instead of managing fear, you use it as a compass pointing toward what matters most to you. Instead of coping with disappointment, you mine it for the clarity it offers about what you genuinely want. People at stage 4 have done enough internal work that they've restructured the way their nervous system interprets experience. Challenges that would devastate someone at stage 1 become interesting problems to solve. Criticisms that would send someone at stage 2 into a spiral become useful data. Pressures that would destabilize someone at stage 3 become environments where they do their clearest thinking. This isn't toxic positivity. It's not pretending that hard things aren't hard. It's a genuine transformation in relationship to difficulty, built through years of deliberate practice, real-world application, and the willingness to examine yourself honestly. Stage 4 is not a destination, it's a direction. You don't arrive there and stay. You move toward it, consistently, and the closer you get, the more every area of your life reflects it. Here is the question that actually matters. Not what stage am I at, though that's worth knowing. The question that matters is, am I moving? Because the distance between stage 1 and stage 2 is enormous. The distance between stage 2 and stage 3 is life-changing. And the direction of movement, even slow movement, even imperfect movement, determines everything about who you become over the next decade. Emotional mastery is not a gift distributed randomly to people with the right temperament. It is a skill developed through the same mechanism as any other skill: deliberate practice, honest feedback, progressive challenge, and time. The people you admire for their composure, their clarity under pressure, their ability to remain centered when everything around them is chaotic. They were not born that way. They built that, often through experiences that nearly broke them. And so can you, but only once you understand, with precision, what you're actually trying to build, and what tools actually work. That's what comes next. The armor method. When the moment hits, and it will hit, you need a system. Not a philosophy, not an inspiration, a system. Something you can deploy in real time, under real pressure, when your heart is hammering and your rational mind is trying to come back online, and every instinct in your body is pushing you toward a response you will spend days regretting. Most advice about emotional control fails at exactly this moment. It's designed for the calm version of you, the version sitting quietly with a journal, reflecting on past behavior, making thoughtful plans for the future. That version doesn't need help. The version that needs help is the one in the middle of a confrontation at 11 p.m., or reading an email that just made their blood pressure spike, or sitting across from someone who knows exactly which buttons to press. That version needs something that works now, something simple enough to remember when rational thinking has gone temporarily offline, something built for the biology of the moment, not the ideal conditions of a self-help framework. That system is armor. 6 steps, 6 letters, designed to interrupt the automatic reaction before it becomes permanent damage, and replace it with a conscious response that reflects who you actually want to be. A. Acknowledge. The first step is the one most people skip, and skipping it is why everything else fails. Before you can do anything about an emotional reaction, you have to acknowledge that you're having one. This sounds absurdly simple. It is not. When you're in the middle of an amygdala hijack, your brain is not narrating the experience. It's inside it. You don't notice that you're getting triggered. You just feel the righteous certainty that the situation requires your immediate response. The sensation of urgency feels like clarity. The impulse to react feels like decisiveness. The acknowledged step interrupts that illusion by creating a moment of recognition. Something is happening in me right now. Not this situation is infuriating, which keeps focus external. Not they made me feel this way, which hands control to someone else. Just, something is happening in me right now. This small linguistic shift from the situation is to I am experiencing activates your prefrontal cortex. It begins the process of creating distance between stimulus and response. It is the crack in the wall through which your rational mind can re-enter. Practice saying it internally. I notice I'm being activated. That's all. No judgment, no analysis, just recognition. R. Remove. Once you've acknowledged what's happening internally, your next move is physical. Remove yourself, or at least your hands, your eyes, and your voice, from the immediate point of engagement. If you're typing an email that's getting increasingly heated, take your hands off the keyboard. If you're in a face-to-face confrontation, take a physical step back, literally, if possible. If you're on a phone call, mute yourself for 10 seconds. If you're in a meeting where something just triggered you, shift your gaze to a neutral point in the room and break eye contact with whoever activated the response. This physical removal accomplishes something your rational mind can't do on its own. It sends a signal to your nervous system that the threat has been interrupted. Your body has been prepared for action. Removing yourself from the immediate engagement gives that prepared energy somewhere to go that isn't forward into the conflict. The most critical application of this step is the delay on digital communication. Nothing has done more damage to more professional and personal relationships in the last decade than messages sent at the peak of emotional activation. The remove step, applied to email and text, is simply this. Write the response if you need to write it, but do not send it. Close the window. Put the phone down. Give yourself a minimum of 20 minutes before you even reread it, let alone decide whether to send it. 20 minutes is enough time for cortisol levels to begin returning to baseline. It is enough time for your prefrontal cortex to come back online. It is almost always enough time to realize that what you were about to send would have made things significantly worse. M. Measured breathing. This is not optional, and it is not symbolic. This is a direct neurological intervention. When you're emotionally activated, your sympathetic nervous system is running the show, flooding your body with stress hormones, accelerating your heart rate, tensing your muscles, and keeping your amygdala in a state of high alert. You cannot think your way out of this state. You cannot will your way out of it, but you can breathe your way out of it. Specifically, inhale slowly through your nose for a count of 4. Hold for a count of 4. Exhale slowly through your mouth for a count of 6. The extended exhale is the critical element. When you exhale slowly, you stimulate your vagus nerve, the neural highway that connects your brain to your body's parasympathetic system, the biological counterforce to fight or flight. A slow, extended exhale is a direct signal to your nervous system that the emergency is over. Stress hormones begin to clear. Heart rate begins to drop. The prefrontal cortex, your rational, strategic, long-term thinking self, begins to come back online. Repeat this breathing cycle a minimum of 3 times. 5 is better. The goal is not just to feel slightly calmer. The goal is to measurably shift your neurological state from reactive to responsive. This technique is used by Navy SEAL operators before high-stakes operations, by emergency room surgeons before complex procedures, by hostage negotiators before walking into rooms where lives depend on their composure. It works not because it's relaxing, but because it directly intervenes in the biological machinery of your stress response. Oh, observe now that you've interrupted the automatic reaction and begun restoring your neurological baseline, you're ready to actually look at what's happening from a position of relative clarity rather than emotional storm. The observe step has two directions, inward and outward. Observing inward means asking, what am I actually feeling right now? Not a general sense of bad or upset, but something more precise. Are you feeling disrespected? Afraid of losing something? Embarrassed? Threatened? Disappointed? The more specifically you can name the emotion, the more power you have over it. Research from UCLA's psychology department has consistently demonstrated that labeling an emotion with precision, what researchers call affect labeling, reduces activity in the amygdala and increases activity in the prefrontal cortex. Naming your emotion is not soft. It is a neurological strategy. Observing outward means asking, what actually happened here, separated from my interpretation of it? This is where most people discover that their emotional reaction was not to the event itself, but to the story they instantly constructed about the event. Consider, a colleague sends you a short, clipped response to your proposal. That is the event. The story your amygdala constructed in 12 milliseconds might be, they think my work is worthless, or they're trying to undermine me, or I'm about to be sidelined on this project. Those stories may or may not be accurate, but your body responded to the story as if it were fact, long before you had any evidence. The observe step is the practice of returning to the event and separating it from the story. What did they actually say? What evidence exists for the interpretation you applied? What other explanations are plausible? More often than you will find comfortable, the emotional intensity of your reaction was appropriate to your story, but disproportionate to what actually happened. R. Reframe. Once you've separated the event from your interpretation, you're in a position to deliberately choose a more useful interpretation. Cognitive reframing is not positive thinking. It is not pretending that difficult situations aren't difficult. It is the recognition that your first interpretation of any event is not objective truth. It is a hypothesis filtered through your history, your fears, your current stress level, and the negativity bias hardwired into your amygdala. Reframing means generating alternative hypotheses and choosing the most useful one that is still plausible. The colleague who sent the clipped response? They might be overwhelmed with another deadline. They might be having a difficult day personally. They might process information differently from you and communicate tersely as a baseline. The reframe doesn't require you to conclude that everything is fine. It requires you to expand beyond the most threatening interpretation your amygdala defaulted to. In professional environments specifically, the single most powerful reframe is this: almost nothing that happens at work is actually about me. Other people's behavior is almost always about their own pressures, their own fears, their own history. When you stop taking everything personally, you stop handing power to situations and people who were never actually targeting you. R. Respond now. And only now, you are ready to act. The final R in armor is where you make a conscious, deliberate choice about what to do next, guided by 3 questions. What response aligns with who I want to be? What response serves the outcome I actually care about? What response will I be comfortable with tomorrow, next week, and next year? Sometimes the answer to all 3 questions is, say nothing. Not because you're suppressing what you feel, but because the most powerful move in many situations is silence. Silence that is chosen, not the silence of someone who has been silenced, but the silence of someone who has assessed the situation and determined that this moment does not require their words. Sometimes the answer is a response that looks nothing like your initial impulse. Instead of defending yourself, you ask a question. Instead of escalating, you de-escalate. Instead of proving you're right, you get curious about the other person's perspective. The armor method does not tell you what to do. It creates the conditions under which you can decide. The real you, not the 6-second reactive version of you, what the right action is. That is the whole game. Advanced tools for extreme pressure. The armor method handles the acute moment. But emotional mastery isn't just about managing individual incidents. It's about rebuilding your baseline, the neurological and physiological foundation from which all of your responses emerge. Think of it this way. The lower your baseline stress, the higher your threshold for emotional hijack, the better your physiological foundation, the more capacity you have for regulation before you hit your limit. You can be incredibly skilled at the armor method and still be undermined consistently by a body that is chronically depleted. Here are the advanced tools that operate at the level of baseline. Somatic reset. Using the body to change the mind. Your emotional state and your physical state are not parallel systems. They are the same system, approached from different directions, which means that you can change your emotional state by intervening at the physical level, often faster and more reliably than by trying to change your thoughts. Progressive muscle relaxation works by discharging the physical tension that accumulates during emotional activation. Starting from your feet and moving systematically upward, you tense each muscle group for 5 seconds, then release completely. The deliberate release of physical tension sends a direct signal to your nervous system that the emergency has passed. 5 minutes of this practice can shift your entire physiological state. Cold exposure is more powerful than most people expect. Splashing cold water on your face or taking a cold shower activates the same vagal pathways as measured breathing, but faster and more forcefully. Special operations units have used cold exposure as a regulation tool for decades, precisely because it works under conditions where more subtle techniques cannot gain traction. Movement matters because it provides an outlet for the physical energy that your stress response has mobilized. When you're emotionally activated, your body has prepared for action. If that energy has nowhere to go, it stays in your system, maintaining the activated state long after the trigger has passed. Even 5 minutes of vigorous movement, walking fast, doing jumping jacks, taking the stairs, begins to metabolize that energy and return your system toward baseline. Timeline reframing, changing your temporal perspective. Your amygdala is fundamentally a present moment organ. It responds to what is happening now with a sense of permanence, as if the current situation will always be the situation, as if the current emotional state will always be the emotional state. Timeline reframing directly counters this by deliberately shifting your temporal perspective. Ask yourself, how will I feel about this in 1 hour, then 1 day, then 1 week, then 1 year? This exercise is simple, almost embarrassingly so, and it is extraordinarily effective because it reveals, almost every time, that the situation carrying so much emotional weight in this moment will be largely irrelevant within a time frame that is not difficult to reach. The second application is more powerful. Connect with your future self. Close your eyes for 60 seconds and imagine yourself 5 years from now having successfully navigated this situation and many others like it. What does that version of you know about this moment that you can't see from inside it? What would they tell you to do? This is not fantasy. It is a proven technique for accessing your long-term self's perspective when your short-term self is running the show. And it consistently produces better decisions than reacting from the emotional state of the present moment. Energy architecture. Protecting your regulatory capacity. Your capacity for emotional regulation is not unlimited. It is a finite resource that depletes throughout the day, affected by sleep quality, nutritional state, physical movement, social load, and cumulative stress exposure. This means that emotional control is not just a mental skill, it is a physical one, and it means that the decisions you make about sleep, nutrition, and recovery are not separate from your emotional mastery practice. They are its foundation. Sleep deprivation of even 1 to 2 hours measurably increases amygdala reactivity while decreasing prefrontal cortex function, which is precisely the combination that makes emotional hijacking both more likely and harder to recover from. Poor nutritional choices. Particularly blood sugar instability from skipped meals or processed food create the same effect through a different mechanism. Chronic physical inactivity eliminates one of the body's primary tools for stress hormone clearance. This is the part of emotional mastery that nobody wants to hear, because it requires changing things that feel unrelated to emotional control. But the data is unambiguous. You cannot regulate your emotions reliably from a depleted body. Protecting your regulatory capacity means treating sleep, nutrition, and movement not as lifestyle choices, but as professional requirements, the same way an elite athlete treats recovery, because that's exactly what you are. An elite performer whose instrument is your own nervous system. The most dangerous person in the room. There is a particular kind of person who makes other people quietly uncomfortable. Not because they're aggressive, not because they're cold or arrogant or difficult to read in an off-putting way. They make people uncomfortable because they cannot be figured out, because the usual tools, flattery, provocation, social pressure, status signaling, don't seem to land the way they're supposed to, because when you push them, nothing predictable happens. These people are not mysterious by accident. They are not naturally unflappable, born without the emotional wiring the rest of us carry. They have simply understood something that most people never figure out, that being categorizable is a vulnerability, that the moment someone can predict your reactions, they can control your behavior, and that the most sovereign position available in any social, professional, or personal environment is the one that cannot be mapped. This is the no-one advantage, and it is built entirely on the foundation of the work covered in the previous chapters, because you cannot become strategically uncategorizable while you're still reacting automatically. Reactivity is the mechanism by which other people map you. Every time you respond predictably to a trigger, you give them another data point. Every time your ego takes the bait, you confirm that the bait works. Every time you perform your identity, your status, your credentials, your certainty about who you are and what you stand for, you hand people a blueprint for how to manage you. The no-one strategy is not about having no identity. It is about not advertising it. It is about understanding that the less information others have about your pressure points, your needs, and your predictable patterns, the less leverage they have over your behavior. Let's talk about what this looks like in practice. Marcus Osei grew up in Minneapolis, the son of a Ghanaian immigrant who ran a small accounting firm and an American mother who taught high school history. He was smart, intensely competitive, and, by his own later admission, deeply attached to being recognized as the smartest person in the room. That attachment was invisible to him for most of his 20s. He couldn't see it as a vulnerability because it felt like a strength. He was often the smartest person in the room. His analysis was sharp, his instincts were good, and his track record of being right gave him a kind of intellectual confidence that read, "To most people, as competence. What it actually was, he discovered at 31, was a leash. The discovery came during a tense board negotiation at a Chicago-based technology startup where he had been brought in as a strategic consultant. Across the table was a woman named Rachel Yun, a veteran investor with 20 years of deal-making experience and the particular skill of knowing exactly which thread to pull to make someone unravel. She pulled his. Subtly, almost graciously, she questioned a projection he had developed. Not aggressively, not dismissively, but with the careful, almost gentle skepticism of someone who doubted his work was quite as sophisticated as he believed. Marcus spent the next 40 minutes proving her wrong. He was thorough. He was precise. He cited sources, walked through methodology, addressed every possible counterargument with the focused energy of someone who needed to be vindicated in this room, in front of these people, on this particular point. He was brilliant, and he lost the negotiation. Not because his projections were wrong, they weren't, but because Rachel Yun had spent 40 minutes watching him perform, cataloging his responses, identifying exactly what he needed and exactly how much energy he would expend to get it. And when the moment came to make the real move, the pivot that the whole negotiation had been building toward, she made it. And Marcus, who had exhausted his focus and emotional capital on proving a point that didn't determine the outcome, wasn't positioned to counter it. Afterward, sitting in his car in the parking structure, Marcus replayed the conversation and felt something cold settle in his chest. He hadn't been beaten by superior information or better strategy. He had been beaten by his own need to be seen as right. Rachel Yun hadn't needed to defeat him. She had simply needed to find the thing he couldn't walk away from. And she'd found it in the first 10 minutes. He had been categorized, and categorized people are manageable people. The no-one advantage begins with a question that most high performers never think to ask. What do people learn about me when I react? Every reaction is a disclosure. When you get defensive about a piece of work, you disclose that your identity is attached to that work. When you visibly need credit for an idea, you disclose that recognition is a pressure point. When you react with extra intensity to a specific type of criticism about your intelligence, your character, your background, your decisions, you disclose that the criticism found something real. These disclosures accumulate. Over time, the people in your professional and personal environment build a detailed, largely accurate map of who you are and how to affect you. They know which topics make you light up and which ones make you shut down. They know what kind of flattery works on you and what kind of challenge destabilizes you. They know, sometimes without consciously knowing that they know, exactly how to get a predictable response out of you. That map is their leverage, and you drew it for them, reaction by reaction, over years. The no-one strategy is the practice of becoming unmappable, not through deception or performance, but through genuine internal sovereignty. When you have actually done the work of not needing external validation, you don't have to fake indifference to flattery. You're genuinely not moved by it. When you have actually resolved your relationship with being criticized, you don't have to perform composure under criticism. You're genuinely not destabilized by it. This is the distinction that separates the no-one strategy from simple stoicism or emotional suppression. Suppression is hiding a reaction that's still there. Sovereignty is genuinely not having the reaction because the need that the reaction was protecting no longer has the same grip. Identity, ego, and the trap of being known here is the uncomfortable truth at the center of this chapter. Most of what you think of as your identity, your opinions, your positions, your strongly held sense of who you are and what you stand for, functions, in practice, less as a source of strength and more as a collection of triggers waiting to be activated. This is not an argument against having values, convictions, or a clear sense of self. Those things are not only compatible with the no one strategy, they are essential to it. What the strategy challenges is the performance of identity, the need to have your identity confirmed, defended, and validated by the people around you. Consider how much energy the average person expends in any given week managing other people's perception of them, crafting the right response to a criticism so they don't appear weak, positioning their accomplishments in conversation so they appear successful without seeming to brag, monitoring social dynamics to assess their standing, adjusting their behavior based on who is watching and what those people value. This is not living. This is management. And it is exhausting, constant, and ultimately self-defeating, because the version of you that you're protecting is the version other people can control. The ego, in the psychological sense of the word, the constructed self-image that needs protection and validation, is not your ally. It is your most reliable liability. It is the part of you that takes bait. It is the part that cannot walk away from a challenge to its self-concept. It is the part that turns a reasonable professional disagreement into a personal confrontation, that turns a mild criticism into an existential threat, that turns someone else's success into evidence about your own inadequacy. And the ego has a particular vulnerability that skilled people exploit constantly. It cannot tolerate being reduced. When someone treats you as less than you believe you are, the ego screams for correction. When someone challenges something you've claimed expertise in, the ego cannot remain silent. When someone gets credit for something you contributed to, the ego demands recognition. These responses feel like self-respect. They are actually self-exposure. Elena Vasquez had been a senior editor at a major publishing house in New York for 11 years when she first encountered the principle that would change how she operated professionally. She was brilliant at her work, the kind of editor who could feel the structure of a manuscript the way a surgeon feels tissue. But she had spent her career in an industry that runs on reputation, taste, and the quiet power games that come with both. And she had spent those years defending hers. Every meeting where her editorial judgment was questioned became a subtle war. Every time a younger colleague's project outperformed hers, she felt the need to contextualize, to explain the factors involved, to position the comparison in ways that protected her standing. Every time her taste was challenged, she challenged back, intelligently, professionally, but unmistakably. She was, in the language of her industry, formidable. People knew where they stood with Elena. They knew what she valued, what she dismissed, what would get her approval, and what would earn her contempt. They also knew exactly how to manage her. Her assistant, a 26-year-old from Austin named Dominic, understood her better than she understood herself. He knew which manuscripts to put at the top of the pile when she was in a good mood, and which to hold until she'd had her second coffee. He knew which colleagues she found threatening and softened information that came from them before passing it to her. He knew that if you needed her to take a meeting she'd initially resist, you framed it as something a competitor might benefit from if she declined. Dominic was 26 years old, and he was running her. Not maliciously, not even consciously. He was simply doing what everyone does with a person who can be reliably predicted. He was using the map. Elena only understood this when Dominic left for another position and his replacement, less experienced, less politically fluent, started handling information in ways that didn't account for her patterns. Suddenly, she was getting manuscripts she wasn't ready for, meetings she hadn't been prepared for, information delivered without the buffering she'd been unconsciously relying on. The experience was uncomfortable. It was also revelatory. She realized for the first time that her fierce sense of her own identity, her strong opinions, Her well-known tastes, her clear signals about what she valued and what she dismissed, had made her extraordinarily easy to manage. Everyone in her professional environment had learned the system, and they'd all been running it. She spent the next year practicing something she called strategic opacity, not dishonesty, not performance, simply the discipline of not reflexively disclosing her reactions, of sitting with an opinion before expressing it, of letting questions land without immediately revealing whether they'd found a target, of developing genuine comfort with being temporarily unknown in a situation rather than rushing to establish herself. The results were not what she expected. She had assumed that being less legible would make her less influential. The opposite happened. When people couldn't predict her response, they paid more attention to her actual words. When she didn't immediately signal approval or disapproval, people worked harder to make a genuine case. When she stopped performing her expertise, people seemed to take it more seriously. The room, it turned out, had been organizing itself around her reactions for years. When her reactions became less available, the room had to organize itself around something else. And that something else, the actual quality of ideas and work, was where Elena had always believed the real game was being played. She had just been blocking her own view of it. The no-one advantage, fully understood, is this. When you stop performing your identity, when you stop needing to be recognized, validated, and correctly categorized by the people around you, you don't disappear. You don't become less. You become genuinely free to operate from your actual values and your actual judgment without the constant interference of ego protection. You make better decisions because you're not making them to defend a self-image. You have better relationships because you're not requiring other people to manage your emotional state. You carry more influence because influence flows toward people who are centered, not performing centeredness, but actually quietly, unshakably grounded in who they are without needing anyone else to confirm it. The most powerful person in any room is not the one demanding to be recognized. It is the one who no longer needs to be. The compound architecture of emotional sovereignty. Everything in this book has been building toward one question. Not how do I control my reactions in a single difficult moment, though that matters enormously. The deeper question is, how do I become, over time, the kind of person for whom emotional sovereignty is the default? Not a skill I deploy under pressure, not a technique I remember to apply when things get hard. A way of being, a baseline. The ground I stand on rather than the ladder I climb when I need to. That transformation doesn't happen through insight. It doesn't happen through motivation. It happens through architecture. The deliberate design of daily practices, environmental conditions, and relationship structures that make emotional mastery progressively more automatic and emotional reactivity progressively less available. Think of it the way engineers think about infrastructure. A well-designed bridge doesn't require the people crossing it to make constant micro-adjustments to stay safe. The safety is built into the structure. The geometry, the materials, the load distribution. All of it is designed so that the desired outcome happens by default, not by effort. Your emotional operating system works the same way. Right now, for most people, the structure is optimized for reactivity, because reactivity is what the modern environment rewards, what social media incentivizes, what stressed and depleted nervous systems default to. Building emotional sovereignty means redesigning that structure, piece by piece, until the default changes. Here is how that architecture gets built. The daily practice. 5 minutes. That change, everything. The single most common mistake people make when they decide to develop emotional mastery is trying to do too much at once. They read a book like this one, feel genuinely moved by the ideas, and commit to a sweeping transformation of their inner life. Meditation at dawn, journaling at night, therapy on Wednesdays, cold showers every morning, new diet, new social circle, new everything. Within 3 weeks, they're doing none of it, because they tried to renovate the entire building at once instead of laying one brick at a time. The research on habit formation is unambiguous on this point. Frequency matters more than duration. 5 minutes of focused emotional regulation practice every single day will produce more neurological change than 2 hours of intense effort on the weekends. The brain rewires through repetition, not through intensity. Consistency is the mechanism, so start here. Before anything else, before the advanced techniques and the strategic frameworks. 5 minutes every morning before you check your phone. In those 5 minutes, you do 3 things. First, 1 minute of measured breathing, the pattern from Chapter 5. Inhale 4 counts, hold 4, exhale 6. This is not warming up. This is training your vagus nerve to respond to that pattern with immediate parasympathetic activation. You are conditioning your nervous system so that when you need this tool under pressure, it works instantly and automatically. Second, 2 minutes of what the neuroscience community calls affect labeling, identifying and naming your current emotional state with precision. Not, I feel fine or I feel stressed. Something specific. I notice mild anxiety about the conversation I need to have this afternoon. I notice residual frustration from yesterday's meeting. I notice a low-level excitement about the project I'm starting. This practice, repeated daily, builds the emotional granularity that makes regulation possible. You cannot navigate what you cannot name. Third, 2 minutes of intention setting. Not goals, not affirmations, but a single clear answer to this question. Today, when something activates me, what kind of person do I want to be in that moment? This is the question that your future self, the one facing the difficult conversation, the unexpected criticism, the frustrating obstacle, needs to have already answered. Because in the moment of activation, there is no time to figure out your values. You need to already know them. 5 minutes. Every day. Non-negotiable. Environmental design, building the conditions for sovereignty. Your emotional state does not exist in a vacuum. It is profoundly, continuously shaped by your environment. The information you consume, the physical spaces you inhabit, the people you spend time with, the stimuli your nervous system is constantly processing in the background. Most people design their environment for convenience, entertainment, or social connection, and then wonder why their emotional baseline is chronically elevated. They fill their mornings with news designed to trigger alarm, their commutes with podcasts optimized for outrage, their evenings with social media feeds that are architecturally engineered to produce social comparison anxiety. And then they try to manage their emotional state through willpower alone. This is like trying to maintain physical fitness while eating fast food at every meal. The environment is working against the goal. Auditing your information environment is not about avoidance or ignorance. It is about deliberate curation. What are you consuming, and what is it doing to your baseline stress level? Which news sources are informing you, and which are simply activating you? Which relationships in your life are genuinely nourishing, and which are chronically depleting? Which spaces in your home and workplace support the emotional state you want to maintain, and which undermine it? The goal is not to eliminate all difficulty and discomfort. That would eliminate growth. The goal is to stop paying unnecessary environmental costs for your emotional regulation. Every bit of energy your nervous system spends managing stimuli that serve no real purpose is energy unavailable for the moments that actually matter. One specific environmental practice deserves particular attention: the first 30 minutes of your morning and the last 30 minutes of your night. These windows have outsized influence on your neurological baseline. The first 30 minutes after waking are a period of heightened neuroplasticity. Your brain is literally more receptive to pattern setting during this window than at almost any other time of day. What you put into that window shapes the emotional tone of everything that follows. A morning that begins with measured breathing, deliberate intention, and calm silence creates a fundamentally different neurological starting point than one that begins with a phone screen full of notifications and anxiety-inducing headlines. The final 30 minutes before sleep matter for different reasons. Your brain consolidates the emotional patterns of the day during sleep, which means the emotional state you're in when you fall asleep influences what gets reinforced in your neural architecture. A night that ends in scrolling, conflict, or stimulating content produces different consolidation than one that ends in reflection, gratitude, or genuine rest. Protect these windows. They are not luxuries. They are structural elements of your emotional foundation. Strategic relationships. Choosing your neurological environment. The most underestimated factor in emotional development is the people you spend the most time with. This is not a metaphor. Mirror neurons, the brain cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing it, mean that you are continuously and unconsciously absorbing the emotional patterns of the people around you. You don't choose to be influenced by their reactivity or their composure, their anxiety, or their groundedness. It happens automatically, at the neurological level, simply through proximity and repeated exposure. This means that spending significant time with chronically reactive, emotionally volatile, or dramatically negative people is not merely unpleasant, it is neurologically costly. Your brain is being trained, against your conscious preferences, by their patterns. This is not an argument for cutting people out of your life carelessly or for surrounding yourself exclusively with pleasant, agreeable companions who never challenge you. Genuine relationships involve difficulty, friction, and the full range of human experience. The question is not whether the people around you are perfect. The question is whether they are, on balance, moving in a direction that supports your development, or whether they are actively modeling and reinforcing the patterns you're trying to change. Be honest with yourself about this, not with judgment toward others, but with clarity about the actual effect specific relationships have on your emotional baseline. Some relationships energize you, and some drain you. And that difference is not just subjective, it is measurable in your cortisol levels, your sleep quality, and your capacity for regulation in the hours that follow. Invest more deliberately in the relationships that move you forward. Create more distance, not necessarily cutting contact, but reducing exposure, from relationships that consistently pull your baseline in the wrong direction. And find people who are doing this work. Find people who are genuinely committed to emotional development, not as a topic of intellectual interest, but as a lived practice. Because the mirror neuron effect works both ways. The composure, groundedness, and genuine sovereignty of people doing this work will begin to train your nervous system toward those same qualities. You will absorb their patterns as naturally as you would absorb anyone else's. Except these are patterns worth having. The life that becomes available. There is a version of your life that is not available to you right now, not because you lack the intelligence for it or the talent or the ambition, but because a significant portion of your cognitive and emotional resources that could be invested in building something extraordinary, are being continuously consumed by the management of your own reactivity. Think about what it costs you, in a single average week, to manage the aftermath of emotional reactions. The mental energy spent replaying conversations you wish had gone differently. The relational energy spent repairing damage done by words you can't unsay. The professional energy spent navigating the political fallout of a moment when you let your guard down and showed more than you intended. The physical energy drained by the chronic cortisol load of a nervous system that is always slightly on alert. Now compound that across a year, across a decade. The cost is not just energy, it is trajectory. It is the relationships that never deepened because your reactivity created a ceiling on intimacy. It is the opportunities that went to someone else because they were perceived as more reliable under pressure. It is the version of yourself, calmer, clearer, more genuinely powerful, that has been waiting on the other side of this work. James Whitfield was 53 years old when he started doing this work seriously. He had built a successful construction business in Charlotte, North Carolina, over 25 years, the kind of business that required him to be decisive, direct, and willing to fight for what he believed in. These qualities had served him well. They had also, he came to understand, extracted a significant price. 2 marriages that ended in exhaustion rather than catastrophe. A relationship with his adult daughter that was characterized by careful distance. She loved him, he knew, but she had learned early that certain topics would send him somewhere she couldn't follow. A business partner of 12 years who had quietly begun rooting around him on major decisions, not out of disloyalty, but out of the fatigue of never knowing which version of James would show up to a difficult conversation. James came to this work not through self-help curiosity, but through a specific incident. During a contract negotiation with a municipal authority, he had allowed a condescending comment from a city official to pull him completely off his strategy. He had spent 20 minutes making a case he'd already won, proving a point that didn't affect the outcome, and in doing so had missed the window to close the deal on terms that would have been significantly more favorable. He drove home that afternoon aware, with unusual clarity, that he had been doing this his entire life, that his intensity, which he had always understood as a strength, was also the most reliable mechanism by which other people controlled his behavior, that he had spent 53 years being exceptionally good at reacting and considerably less skilled at choosing. He was not a man given to dramatic personal reinvention. He didn't read self-help books or attend seminars. What he did was simple and consistent. He adopted the 5-minute morning practice. He started asking, after every significant interaction, what his reaction had disclosed about him. He began, slowly and imperfectly, to practice the pause, the deliberate interruption of automatic response that creates the space for choice. The changes were not dramatic. They were quiet and cumulative. Within 6 months, his business partner commented, without knowing anything about the work James was doing, that he seemed different in negotiations, steadier, harder to read. The partner meant it as a compliment, though he couldn't have articulated why it felt like one. Within a year, James's daughter had initiated 3 conversations about topics she had previously kept away from him. She did this not because he had addressed the old incidents directly, but because something about the texture of his presence had changed. He was still her father, still direct, still strong-willed, still very much himself. But there was more room in him now, room she hadn't known she'd been waiting for. Within 2 years, James closed the largest contract in his company's history. He attributed it, in the privacy of his own assessment, not to any particular business strategy, but to the fact that he had sat in 3 difficult negotiating sessions without once letting the other side see where to push. They had tried. He had noticed them trying, and he had felt, for the first time in his professional life, that his composure wasn't a performance. It was simply who he was now. This is what becomes available, not a different life, your life, but navigated from a fundamentally different internal position, The same challenges, the same difficult people, the same professional pressures and relational complexities that everyone faces, but you, in the middle of all of it, genuinely different, genuinely steadier, genuinely harder to move off your center. The relationships deepen because you've stopped requiring them to manage your emotional state. The opportunities expand because you've stopped advertising your pressure points. The decisions improve because they're no longer filtered through the distorting lens of ego protection and reactive emotion. And something else happens, something that is harder to name, but that everyone who does this work describes in some version of the same way. You stop being tired in the way you used to be tired, not physically, emotionally. The chronic low-grade exhaustion of a life lived at the mercy of your own reactivity, always on the edge of activation, always managing the aftermath, always carrying the weight of words and decisions that didn't reflect who you actually wanted to be. That exhaustion begins to lift. What replaces it is not ease, exactly. Life does not become easy, but it becomes clean. Your responses are yours. Your choices are yours. The person you are in the difficult moments more closely resembles the person you are in the calm ones. And that coherence, that alignment between your inner life and your outer behavior, is the closest thing to peace that most people will ever find. The work begins with a single decision, not a commitment to perfection, not a promise to never react again, not a complete overhaul of your personality or your patterns, just one decision made right now, in this moment. The decision to take the gap seriously, the space between stimulus and response, between what happens to you and what you choose to do about it, is where your entire life is determined, not in the big moments, the dramatic turning points, the obvious crossroads, in the thousand small gaps of every ordinary day. You cannot control what enters that gap. The criticism will come, the provocation will come. The moments of unfairness, frustration, betrayal, and disappointment will come. They come for everyone. What you can control, what this book has been entirely about, is what you do inside that gap. Whether you fill it with automatic reaction or deliberate response. Whether you let the 6-second version of you make decisions that your long-term self will inherit, or whether you pause, breathe, observe, and choose. The most powerful person in any room is not the one who never feels anything. It is the one who feels everything and still chooses. That person cannot be categorized, cannot be predicted, cannot be managed or manipulated or reduced to a set of reliable triggers that other people can press at will. That person is sovereign. That person reacts to no one. That person is who you are becoming.